Okay, we have a lot of content that we're going to talk about today, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. For folks that don't know, I'm Megan Murray from La Casa, and today we're going to talk about Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and the theme for this year being I Ask. We're going to have Shana Pike present about sex-positive consent education. So, quick overview of this year's theme. It's all about consent as a part of our daily lives. They've broken it down into these 4 categories, being the basics of asking for and respecting consent, digital consent, teaching consent early, and power dynamics in consent. And NSBRC has some really great resources this year, including a campaign toolkit, some event planning guides, the social media challenges that they've created, all of the graphics that are in this entire presentation, as well as some palm cards and some other resources around those, built around those 4 areas. There's a palm card for each of those 4 areas, as well as a lot of the resources are available to download for free, which is really great. There are some for purchase, and there's also a place on their website that you can register your Sexual Assault Awareness Month event if you want to be on that national registry. And that link at the bottom there will take you to, right to all of the SAAM resources on their website. And we'll make these slides available so that you can access that link. So no need to be scribbling down links as we go through stuff. And now we're gonna talk about Sexual Assault Awareness Month in Wisconsin, and I'm gonna pass things over to Amy from Sexual Assault Crisis Center.
Good morning. We have a campaign this year that we're dubbing Let's Talk TEAL. And what this is encompassing is a variety of different activities throughout the community. It's going to help us raise public awareness about sexual violence and learning what you can do to help end it. And there's several different areas. And first off, one of them is social reach. It's our awareness. And what we're doing is we're creating Facebook posts that are going to have activities that people can participate in, information, videos, and interaction. So there's a variety of different ways that people can engage just even on social media in addition to the other activities we'll have. We have really great reach on Facebook. Last year during Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we had over 40,000 people that we reached and over 12,000 clicks and engaged members. So we know that this is a really great audience for us. And then the next thing we have is we can join the community, really creating that interest. And what we're going to have is we have local businesses who are going to be participating. So once we get people engaged on Facebook, they see the activities. For example, we have, you can go and get a teal extension put in your hair. We have a local bakery that is going to have a cookie with the teal ribbon on it. We have another bakery that's going to do a cupcake. You can have a hand-tied bouquet made at a flower bar. So all of these activities are going to be happening throughout the month of April, and that's sort of the interest that people are showing. And then once they go and participate, we've created a rack card. And so again, this is additional information for people who want to learn more about what it is that the Sexual Assault Crisis Center does in the community, as well as ways that they can participate and how they can help if maybe they know somebody who needs assistance. This is an opportunity then for them to learn more and become an advocate in the community. And then we also have a Take the Pledge, again, getting people engaged. We have a big poster board. It's a 28 by 40 foam core, and it says, I pledge to believe, to support survivors, and to help end the silence. And so these poster boards are going to be located at places, high schools, public libraries, the Outagamie County Courthouse, Calumet County Courthouse, places like that. People can go and they can become engaged in actually taking part in and understanding more and taking the pledge to believe people. Then the last thing we have then is our Denim Day. And then this is going to be the commitment where they can connect with the mission. And again, here they can take the pledge. We're going to have tabling activities going on. They can learn more about the work that we do, how they can become a volunteer, as well as staff would be available to ask questions. So all of this, again, is going to be happening throughout the entire month of April and kind of culminating then ultimately on that Denim Day. So any questions?
Thank you so much for sharing, Amy. I don't see any questions coming in, but I will let you know if any pop up. As well as I know you have to jump off kind of early, so I will definitely connect people with you if they have questions for you directly.
Sounds good. Thank you, Megan.
Wonderful. Okay. Next, we're going to have Christy share.
All right. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Puna or Christy Moore. I use either name, whichever one is fine. Hence the parentheses. I am the Hmong Sexual Assault Advocate Coordinator for our Induchia Sexual Assault Advocacy Program at the Eau Claire Area Hmong Mutual Assistance Association. Just a quick bio about me. I have worked at the agency for about a year, and so if y'all have any tips or any advices in regards to advocacy or more ideas for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, please do let me know. Otherwise, I'm super excited to be here as April is coming up in 2 weeks, and I have a lot of things planned out. So before I cover the two main events that our agency will be holding for SAAM this year, I have planned for our agency our staff to participate in wearing teal on Tuesdays in April in support of sexual assault victim survivors and awareness of sexual assault. And then we're going to finish it off with wearing denim, jeans, etc. on Denim Day. So hopefully we're able to take pictures of our progress and put that on social media. So the very first event that our agency will be holding in April is our third annual Be the Light Luncheon. And it is a free and public event to anyone, and it's held at our agency on April 27th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Lunch will be provided, and the food will be Hmong food, so hopefully that'll be good. This year, we have focused on a variety of different activities rather than presentations. So the highlight of our luncheon will include a short sexual assault film that our agency will produce, and it is based on a Hmong sexual assault survivor's story. That survivor has given us permission to share her story without disclosing her identity, and she has expressed that this is a healing way for her as she grows stronger with what had happened. And so I'm supporting her in any way that I can in helping her share her story as she creates the film. And then after we show the film, I will give a short presentation about our Duchia Sexual Assault Advocacy Program, just because not many Hmong folks know about advocacy and what it is and the services that I'm able to provide. And so it'll be very educational for them. Aside from the presentation and the short film, we have also included activities such as the Healing Heart activity. This activity is actually one of my favorites as it's very fun and it gets the attendees engaged. So basically this activity includes the attendees writing down inspirational quotes, supporting words, supporting pictures for victim survivors of sexual assault on these teal puzzle pieces. And then towards the end of the event, we will all come together and piece those pieces together, and it'll form a big heart. So hence the Healing Heart activity. And then aside from that, we will have a free raffle drawing for the attendees who attend, in addition to a silent auction that they can participate in. The silent auction will actually include the arts and crafts that my support group has created, and then the money that is raised from the silent auction will be put into my support group to use for our support group gatherings, our arts and craft supplies, etc. And so that kind of concludes a little bit about what our third annual Be the Light Luncheon will be. So the next event that I want to talk about is our fundraiser. Our agency will be actually holding our fundraiser the second time around. It is a play on word on the word fundraiser, but it is pho, which is a Vietnamese noodle soup dish. This fundraiser will be held on April 19th at the Forage, which is our local neighborhood kitchen from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And each pho bowl will come with a drink, and it costs only $7. Our youth program called Building Bridges will actually be helping us out with the fundraiser in order to raise awareness for sexual assault and domestic violence, in addition to raising money for their end of the year trip to maybe Bay Beach in Green Bay or their camp retreat. So I'm really hoping that this year will be as successful as last year, just because we did raise about $1,000 last year. So if y'all are in town, please stop on by. The pho is super good. Otherwise, that kind of
awesome.
Yeah, that kind of concludes my presentation. So if y'all would like to find further information about our agency or my program, do visit us on our website or Facebook page, or just give give me a call, or send me an email, or otherwise just list it on the question chat thing here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
All right, and now we are going to hear from River Falls, from Ashley and Katie.
Hi, my name is Ashley Bredesen. I work at the St. Croix Valley Sexual Assault Response Team in River Falls, Wisconsin.
Hi, I am Katie Ryan Niznik, and I am the Sexual Assault Services Director at Turning Point for Victims of Domestic and Sexual Violence. And so we're going to be talking about Take Back the Night. We are specifically focusing in the River Falls community again this year. It's something that we've been partnering for quite some time now. The university is also participating in this with us. Turning Point, we have a MOU with the university to be the campus victim advocate there, and we've all been, Ashley and myself have been working with Chantel, who's the violence prevention coordinator on campus, to partner and get everything going. So what we do, you'll see we have the schedule of events on the slide in front, but basically what it is we have people come and participate. There's a bunch of tables that we have. We have some that focuses on consent. We're going to have a what were you wearing display. People can participate in a in her shoes simulation. So just a variety of different activities and stuff that people can come and participate in at their leisure, basically. We always have free food. I know that's a big draw for people to come, especially the college students in the community, because River Falls is a college town. And then we are going to have a program which consists of a survivor speaker, and then just giving some history about Take Back the Night as an event. And then we're going to walk through our downtown area, and we are going to have a candlelit vigil. And then on the way back, we usually wrap everything up with a choir. In previous years, we've had people sing Till It Happens to You by Lady Gaga, or last year we had a choir sing Praying by Kesha. So then we can head to the next slide, and Ashley will take over that one.
Yeah, so for planning the event, I think we're lucky we've been doing this. Katie and I just talked how long they've been doing it in River Falls, and we're thinking around like 12 years. So we're lucky that we kind of have an established base. But to start with, we formed a committee, and we've been meeting regularly since November. And that committee comprised of myself, Katie Ryan, and then Chantel Mitchell from our university. And the focus was on a collaborative effort, so we all kind of shared in planning it. Also, what's new for us is the River Falls Take Back the Night is recognized as one of 10 points of light. So what we did is we went on the National Take Back the Night Foundation page and registered our event, and they chose us as one of 10 locations across the United States that is focused on that night. So it's really nice that the National Foundation is featuring us on their social media. They're promoting our event. And they told me in the past that they have had some celebrity interest in certain 10 Points of Light events. I'm not sure if we'll get that because we're only in Wisconsin, but it's kind of cool that we do get that extra advertising for free. Network was super important to us. We're really lucky that we have tons of volunteers that help out at our event every year. So we have different college clubs, community organizations, and high school clubs volunteer at the event. Everything is pretty much donated for the event, all of our food and everything. And it is community and survivor focused. So all of the tables are run by volunteers, and we don't let businesses advertise or anything. We really just wanted to focus on survivors getting what they need from the event and educating the community. Yeah, that is our event. Let us know if you have any questions at all.
So WCASA has our annual event that I think most folks in the state, at least within the field, are pretty familiar with at this point, where we do Wrap Around the Capitol. We've decided this year to refer to it as Rallying in Solidarity with Survivors, even though we weren't sure if we qualify as a rally or not. But anyways, that is on the 6th at 2 p.m., and it should be a really great event. It is every year. We have some good speakers lined up. So hopefully we'll see you guys there at the Capitol. Thanks. And then I'm going to share, oh, shoot. I didn't realize it was going to cut off the bottom there. But you will get these slides, and the link at the bottom will be available to you there. So I wanted to share with you guys another great thing that you could do for Sexual Assault Awareness Month and leading up to it is to do some organizing or assist in some organizing around the Crystal Kaiser case. Some really fantastic organizers in the Milwaukee community, the FreeChrystul Defense Committee, have been putting together resources for folks and letting folks know what they can do to help and really doing the groundwork around this case. Crystal is a sex trafficking survivor who has experienced and is living with the impacts of trauma. She's facing a potential life sentence as punishment for defending herself and for surviving that sexual violence. And this is not a Milwaukee-specific issue or even a Wisconsin-specific issue. Survived and Punished reports that about 60% of people incarcerated in women's prisons nationwide have experienced sexual or physical violence prior to their incarceration. So it's something to really consider what kind of role you can take in this, even if you're not in the local Milwaukee community. These are a couple of flyers that the organizers have been handing out, but WCASA really wants to encourage SASPs and other folks in the field across the state to get involved with these organizing efforts. And the FreeChrystul Defense Committee has given us some examples of some ways that folks can get involved. One of them being to endorse the letter to the Kenosha County District Attorney, Michael Gravely. There are links there both for how individuals can sign on, as well as if your organization would be interested in signing on. We really encourage you to, WCASA has, to please email the FreeChrystul Defense Committee and have your organization added to that letter. We also really want to encourage folks to call or email the DA in support of Crystal and letting them know that survivors should not be punished for surviving sexual violence. And then one that I've been specifically told to really highlight the importance of for you guys is the Packing the Court on April 5th at 9:30. They really want to have as many people as possible there showing their support for Crystal. And I know WCASA plans on attending. We want to make sure to have as many people there as possible, showing red clothing and signaling your support to Crystal. The red clothing, I believe, is because Crystal likes the color red, was something that the organizers have shared with us. So that's one that's really important, as well as reaching across the walls, so sending letters of support to Crystal. Her address is right there that you can write to her while she is incarcerated. And then these are some more important action steps. Educating yourself about Crystal's case and the criminalization of survivors more broadly. Those 3 links there will be available. I know you can't click on them in the webinar, but when we send the slides out, those will be available there. I highly recommend checking, 4 links, sorry. I highly recommend checking them out. There's some really great information. As well as getting connected with and sharing the FreeChrystul campaign page, both on Facebook and Twitter. That's a great place to keep in touch in terms of ways to get involved and ways that you can support these organizing efforts. This is another one that I was asked by the organizers to really highlight, the importance of donating to support Crystal and her family. They are in a situation that is burdening them significantly and are financially burdening them significantly, and these costs, the costs associated with trauma we know are always great, but in this case, monetary donations are incredibly helpful. So there's a link there to a GoFundMe account that you can donate. and as well as that link at the bottom there that is incredibly small, I'm realizing now, about how you can get connected. That's also to the FreeChrystul Facebook page. Oh, and I forgot to point out Wacasa's letter up in the top left-hand corner there if you're interested in some more information about why Wacasa has chosen to stand in solidarity with these organizers. All right, and now I'll hand things off to Caitlin.
Okay, so my name is Caitlin Keach. I'm the Executive Director of Building Awareness, Victim Empowerment at UW Stevens Point. We're a student organization completely led by students here. And so basically our biggest event for April, I'll let Brianna kind of take over and talk about that.
Yeah, hi, I'm Brianna Havens. I'm the Public Relations Volunteer for Promoting Awareness, Victim Empowerment. So for our event in April, we're going to be running a What Were You Wearing event, where we're going to take over an entire room of one of our buildings and display a bunch of outfits from a lot of survivors in our community. So we asked for submissions from our community, from students, staff, people within our community, obviously, and we asked them what they were wearing. And after we did that, we have compiled all of their outfits, and we're going to place their stories next to each outfit. So this will be happening April 15th, 16th, and 17th. And it'll be happening from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on all 3 days, and then from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. on April 16th. We also have CAP Services and the Center for Prevention supporting us in this event, which has been absolutely wonderful. Their support has been integral in us really getting this event off of the ground, so we can't thank them enough. Some of the other events that are happening on our campus for April are going to be, we're making coffee sleeves to distribute to a few coffee shops in the area, including the ones on our campus. And we are also having fabric squares that we are going to sew into a quilt to support survivors. Each of those squares is going to have a support message or a message from survivors so that then we can use that quilt in later events. So I think that's all we have. If you have any questions, please let us know. If not, or if you don't think of them until later, definitely email us or contact us some other way, because we would love to have your support.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. All right, and now I'm going to, I don't need to flip to another slide. I just need to hand things over to Shana, which Peter is going to do. And thank you so much to all of the local programs for sharing. It's always great to get an idea of what's going on around the state, especially I think sometimes if folks are stumped trying to figure out what they want to do in their community. So we really appreciate that.
And Shana, you just make sure show your screen or show your PowerPoint slide.
Oh, I have the wrong one.
There we go.
Did that do it? All right. Can you hear me?
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So good morning, everybody. My name is Shana Pike, and I am an SADV program specialist at Wise Women Gathering Place out of Green Bay. And my pronouns are she, hers, they, theirs, so either one is good. Just as a little bit of background on me, I was doing prevention mostly for the past year. So went into K through 12 classrooms and talked to individuals about sexual assault, harassment, consent. And the thing I kept noticing when in classrooms, or even when talking to adults, because I did a lot of adult presentations as well, is there's this idea that like, yeah, consent's really important, awesome. And then when I ask like, well, how do we do that? Like, how do you do that? Like, what does it look like? I'd be met with a lot of silence, confused looks, and people really didn't have an idea of how to make it not awkward, right? Especially youth. Oh my gosh, so resistant. A lot of the youth I talked to were just very resistant because it would ruin the mood or whatever. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard stuff like this before as well. So it really kind of prompted me to kind of reframe how we're approaching consent education, and maybe kind of expand our lens a little bit beyond like a yes means yes campaign message. So before I hop in, I just want to, I mean, you're on a WCASA webinar, so this kind of goes without saying, but I want to say it anyway, that we will be discussing consent and sexual assault. So please do what you need to do to take care of yourself this morning. So without further ado, I'm hoping that everyone's feeling chatty because I'm starting off with a question. So I'm wondering, and you can sit with this for a second. I want to give you enough time to kind of think about it. But what does consent mean to you? Like in your own words, what does it mean? So just take a few seconds or minutes or whatever to think about that, and then share in the chat box on your webinar viewer.
Well, if folks aren't going to chime in, I'll just say what I think.
Okay.
The most common one is that people come up with is permission. I think is the first thing that you think of.
Yep. Any other thoughts, anybody? Thank you, Megan.
We have some folks typing, so maybe they'll chime in.
Okay. I know it's early, but I'm really hoping that that we can share. There's a lot of knowledge that's chimed in on this space right now, and want to make sure it's not just me talking at you guys, right?
Someone did type in ongoing open conversation.
Okay, awesome.
Oh, we had quite a few that we have not, we were looking in the wrong place. Okay. So someone said respecting boundaries, giving permission, not making assumptions, freely given, continuously given, asking for clarification. Everyone is good with what is happening. No is an option. Ongoing verbal. Seeking mutual enjoyment. I love that one.
Awesome.
A partner who respects my sexual boundaries and who asks and is caring in asking before advancing sexually.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for that. So thank you, Megan, for sharing those as well and relaying those my way. But the cool thing about that is those are all right? But some of them focused on sex specifically. Some of them were just permission in general, right? So that kind of everyday consent stuff that we don't really talk about as much. But everyone kind of had their own way to say it, right? So you don't have to type in if you don't want to for this one. But like, how do you think your meaning of consent differs from the community that you work with, or sorry, the community in general, like general society? Then how does that differ from what consent means to the folks that you work with, right, or your clients, the people that you speak with through your work? So I'll leave a few minutes, seconds here to, you can share as well on either of those or both of these. But just thinking about how these are going to differ, right? They're probably not going to be the same. And that's why it's really important to take a step back and think about what lens we're bringing into our work, especially if we're in the role of an educator, right? Because how we view consent may or may not, and likely won't, line up with how other people view consent, especially because of the messages that we're getting societally in the media, messages that youth are getting, right? They're all going to be a little bit different. And then this is just one example from Planned Parenthood of different ways to frame consent. Did anybody happen to type anything in for that one, or should I keep trucking?
We did get some responses for that.
Okay.
One, I think the community in general thinks of consent as giving a verbal yes or no when it is so much more than that.
Awesome.
Not saying no is consent.
Yes.
They do not understand they have a choice. Community consent would be they have to say yes, either they agree or not, or whether they agree or not, as they see someone as an authority. And then the folks I work with think they should have been louder, more empathic.
Okay. Yeah.
Emphatic, sorry.
And a lot of those sounded like really focusing on the verbal piece of that, right? That if you didn't say anything, then it was just assumed. And that plays into a lot of the scripts that we're told, right? From people, from friends, from media, all of that. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more as we go along. But thank you, everybody, for sharing what you did here. But this is just a little bit of an exercise to think about how your lens as a sexual assault service provider, educator, how that lens impacts your own definition of consent and how that may disconnect a little bit when you're talking to clients or to students or whatever your work community may be. So we'll start off here by talking a little bit about the everyday consent piece, right, that some of you hit on. So pretty basic things, right, that we often forget are really important to think about. So respecting words like no and stop, and that goes for when you're playing with your kiddos or tickling them or something and they're like, stop, right? Even if they were kidding and didn't actually want you to stop, they said that word, right? So we want to take a second and talk to them about that and have a conversation if possible. I'm talking about boundaries, right? Again, kind of focusing on that verbal piece for this, but again, everyday consent goes far beyond just the verbal, and then asking before touching or hugging as opposed to assuming. And this also goes into the work that we do as well. If you are an advocate, that like you're not trying to console somebody physically, right, unless you're asking for permission with a pat on the back or something like that, because obviously you want to make sure that everyone is comfortable with what's going on and that you're not just assuming and stepping into that role. Where things get a little confusing is when we start bringing sex into the mix, right? Because it seems a little more straightforward with the everyday stuff. But sexual consent, we kind of all have our own different idea of what it looks like, even people who work in this field, right, who are trying to come up with snappy things that people can hang on to. Yes means yes. Consent is sexy, and then people are like, nope, that's not okay, right? So now we're looking at consent is mandatory. We got the classic T video, right? And then the no means no. But those are a lot of different perspectives on what sexual consent is, which is a big reason why a lot of people are really confused on what it actually looks like, right? None of these describe lived intimate experiences with people. With some research that I came across when making this a while back, Jason Laker, who actually does a TED Talk that Peter should be sharing with you or did share with you already, he mentioned in his research that we can talk about yes means yes and no means no. That sounds great. That's convenient for lawyers, but in live experiences, it's complicated, right? In the experiences of everyday people, it looks differently. So we'll dive into that and how it can potentially look, right? Okay, so this is going to be our journey today. We're going to start by talking a little bit about the United States and kind of the culture around sex and sexuality that we have. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, but I think it's always kind of good to reframe it and compare it to maybe other places or other sub-communities, right, that are doing things a little differently. And that's when we're going to talk into normalizing consent, right? So there are going to be 3 different things that I dive into, using the Netherlands as like a case study, the Dutch community, and then the LGBTQ and kink community as another kind of great example, and then sexting, which is kind of an interesting one, and we'll dive into that as well. And lastly, kind of the now what. So that depends on you and kind of what you make it, right? So where do we go with this information? So we're going to talk about community-driven change models, how respecting other experiences and wisdom and knowledge, right? Not just saying yes means yes and that's what consent is, but hearing from people, asking people, what does it look like to you? What does it mean to you? How do you and your partners express consent, right? Asking those questions and then getting that information and turning it around as opposed to just assuming that yes means yes, right? So we're trying to go beyond that today, and then also talking about intersectional consent, because there are other intersectional considerations we need to make sure that we're not leaving out certain communities. All right. So dramatizing sex. In the United States, we tend to have a fear of teen sexuality. Hormones and sex are seen as uncontrollable. And this kind of fear of sexuality goes even beyond teens as well, because we very much look at men in general as unable to control their hormones, right? The boys will be boys kind of mantra that we fall back on as another victim blaming tool. But that's pretty embedded into our like country's relationship with sexuality. And the sex education that we offer, there is no unified approach to sex education here. There is federal funding for abstinence only and abstinence-based, no other type of sex education, which is obviously sending a message, right? But some communities do deviate away from that and do their own thing that they think works better. But generally speaking, sex education tries to redirect bad youth sexuality, right? So the abstinence-only scripts are very much, don't do this, you'll get chlamydia and die, right? The classic kind of line there. So as opposed to talking about how to have conversations, how to talk about consent, how to respect each other, how to make sure you're both experiencing pleasure, those are not talked about, generally speaking, at all, right? So that's kind of the foundation we're talking about here. And generally speaking, we need to start talking as a community and in culture. We need to start talking about sex more openly with each other, but also especially with youth, right? Again, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about today is very youth focused. So it's just important to remember that youth are going to answer their questions somewhere, right? So this is an example of on the internet. 78% of LGBTQ youth and about 20% of heterosexual youth use the internet to answer their questions about sex, right? And this is also going to show who's needing more guidance, who's more curious and asking questions, who's feeling like they're not getting their questions met elsewhere, right? So this is really disproportionately impacting LGBTQ individuals, because that, again, that diverse expression of relationships and sexuality are just absent from the sex education that we offer, and obviously there's not a lot of media representation either. And then also, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, pornography, right? Almost all boys and a little over half of girls under 18 have seen pornography at some point. Mainstream pornography is pretty objectifying, misogynistic, right? There's a lot of toxic messages. There's a great lack of consent in a lot of cases. And a lot of them are fetishizing situations that are pretty harmful, right? So if that's where youth are getting their first, oh yeah, sorry?
I don't mean to interrupt you, but somebody did say that the sound seems to have stopped working, so we're going to try to figure that out. I don't want you to keep going if you're just talking into a void.
Just let me know.
Seems like it's a person-specific issue, so we're going to check in with them.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Shana.
All right. Sorry about that. I hope you get that fixed. Should I just keep going then?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there.
No worries. Okay. So all of this information is not to say the internet is bad, right? And that the internet's providing unhelpful stuff, because I've heard from many older folks say that, they used to use the dictionary like we use Google now to answer their sex questions or talk to peers or friends, right? The kind of stuff that's shared on the playground and in between classes. So it isn't just an internet issue, but using this, like, we can see that people are using the internet and having access to a lot of these questions in pornography in ways that maybe they didn't have access before, right? So these are definitely things to think about when we kind of want to plug our ears and not, or plug kids' ears rather, and not talk about sex, because that just goes to further make it taboo, right? So how do we do that? So we're going to talk a little bit about normalizing sex and consent, because we can't do one without the other, right? We can't go in and say consent is a thing that you need to use because it's really important to respect each other if we're looking at sex as a taboo thing that we just don't talk about, right? So they kind of, in my opinion anyway, have to go hand in hand. So this is just, the image here is just one example of a sex positive campaign that went around. I can also share with Peter or where that came from, because they have a lot of really awesome visuals that they created, and that might be a good idea of something to maybe go along with your organization. But what I'm going to do here is not say that any of these examples I bring up are the answer, right? So what I mean by that is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Netherlands as an example. I personally spent 4 months in Amsterdam studying abroad and doing pretty extensive research on their culture on sexuality and consent, what it looks like, belief systems, values, right? However, if we were just to if we were to bottle the Dutch culture around sex and sexuality and apply it here, it would be chaos, right? It's not going to work. Each community has to make their own idea of normalizing sex and consent. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself a little. So I'll talk about the Netherlands and why this is an example. So the sex education and culture in the Netherlands tends to normalize sex. A lot of policymakers and within families have decided to take this approach of tolerance, where they acknowledge that, yep, youth are having sex, they're going to have sex whether we say it's okay or not, right? So their stance is to intervene and address it as healthily as possible. And the general framework is different as well, where as opposed to looking at youth as like ticking time bombs of sexual chaos, right, that their hormones are uncontrollable and we can't do anything to stop it unless we, put them in a box and make sure they have a 9 o'clock curfew, right? Youth are generally seen as autonomous and capable of making their own decisions, right? Kind of that informed choice perspective. And what this looks like between the U.S. and the Netherlands is something is working, right? For the Netherlands, for the United States, our teen birth rate is 8 times higher than the Netherlands. The teen pregnancy rate is 6 times higher. HIV prevalence is 3 times higher, and our abortion rate is also higher. So that's kind of the potential impact here, right? And then they also have some of the highest levels of consistent contraceptive and condom use out of all the nations that were studied in this particular study I'm talking about. So the potential impact of this stuff is pretty great, right? So this is one Dutch sex ed program. Again, not saying this is it, but it does try to take a more holistic approach, right? I think my favorite part about it is that it offers peer-given advice and information, right? So there's little segments in there that are showing someone's age and their name, right? So you can kind of see what other people your age are thinking and talking candidly about their experiences, as well as obviously they're very explicitly talking about consent and making boundaries. I also shared with Peter chapter 3 of this program in English, because giving it to you in Dutch probably wouldn't be very helpful. But that's the consent and making boundaries and where's your line chapter. So if anybody is curious in kind of what that looks like, that'll be shared with you as well. But it more holistically discovers some of these things, and also talks about like what healthy relationships look like, right? And what respect looks like with each other. That's also a conversation that we don't tend to have with our youth. But here's this one segment like I was talking about with that peer-given advice, right? So with the "it's awkward" question, they're kind of addressing like, how do you talk about it? So I boxed off one. It says, Mandy, age 16, said, "Not so fast, kissing and stuff is fine, but I'm not going to bed with you straight away." So he said, "If that's what you want, we'll just wait," right? So kind of showing an example where Mandy defined her line, right, shared her boundary, and it wasn't a catastrophe, right? It seems like her relationship was pretty healthy, and her partner respected what she was saying. So kind of normalizing that exchange a little bit. So I'm just going to stop really quick. Again, I want to encourage any questions, comments, reactions to any of this. So kind of what are you thinking, and how might this relate to you. So at any time, please feel free to pop those in the chat box, and we can talk about those.
We did have someone share that they utilized Dr. Sen's, a Canadian psychologist curriculum, which is has evidence-based data and studies of effectiveness for their program. We also had somebody say that they've talked through with students about identities and not categorizing and putting themselves into boxes, to just be themselves.
Awesome. That's awesome. Great, and I would really love to hear more about Dr. Sen's. Was that the name? Anyway, I'd love to hear more about that if we could share that at some point.
I'll see if we could have the participant that shared that share a link with everybody, and we can include that in the resources that we sent out after.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for sharing that. And to whomever said
that.
Okay. Go for it.
What age do you suggest starting to talk about this?
Yeah. So the content is going to look different, but I personally don't think there's any time that's too early, right? So when kids are really, really little, like before school age or whatever, that's where kind of that everyday consent stuff can come in, right? So like respecting personal space and boundaries, and if somebody says no or stop or they don't like something, that's not a joke, right? We want to respect that and take that seriously. The classic kind of example that people talk about a lot now is how to address like hugging or not hugging family members, and when mom's like, hey, no, go hug uncle or aunt so-and-so, right? How do you approach that? But that's an opportunity to have that conversation about consent, both with that adult and that kid, right? So it doesn't need to be sexual to start talking about this stuff. And as far as sexual consent goes, the idea is that with a greater foundation in everyday consent, that it'll make the sexual consent conversations easier and make a little more sense. I don't have an answer for an age. Every person's different. Every kid's at a different maturity level. Every community looks at it differently, right? So I don't have a hard and fast answer for that. But something that I did notice, at least in when I was doing prevention education K through 12, is that more often than not, when I had to censor certain words out that were explicit, right, sexually, well, not sexually explicit, but that were specifically talking about sex, the resistance I got was from teachers or potential fear of what parents would think, not from youth, right? More often than not, youth were kind of nodding their heads with me, like, yep, like I'm familiar with this, or I know about this, or they would share, stuff they've heard happening at school without names, obviously. Yeah, the resistance usually came from adults and teachers, if anything, right? So just keeping in mind that, again, if we're not talking about it, they're answering those questions somewhere. And if we're not talking about it, how those questions are being answered, we have zero control over, right? So if they're learning from pornography or from their peers or like teenagers at their school or whatever, those answers are gonna look a little different than if we had an open conversation about what healthy relationships and human sexuality kind of look like. Hopefully, that was a really roundabout way of going on that, but hopefully that addresses your question there. Okay. All right, so we'll keep moving along here. So this is another kind of example of where consent is more normalized, right? So within the LGBTQ kink community, now this is not to say that sexual assault, harassment, domestic violence don't happen within LGBTQ and kink communities. I want to make that super duper clear. However, especially within the kink community, they've generally established a more holistic foundation of affirmative consent, right? Before you do anything with anybody,
Before you move on, we did get a question about the last section. Someone asked if sexual assault rates are lower in countries that have those, the more open approach to talking about consent education.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the numbers that I have found have not been like really different from the United States. Again, with data on that stuff, we need to keep in mind the the underreporting rates, right? But I mean, as we know, sexual assault is more about power than anything else. So in terms of like a relationship between those two, I'm not super confident that there would be like a one-to-one connection. Like if we have a more holistic, sex-positive consent foundation, is it going to lower sexual assault, right? Because they kind of stem from slightly different material. But yeah, that's what I've found.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think when we talk about that, it's really important to keep in mind a lot of times with prevention, what we're talking about is longer-term cultural change, especially if we're talking about creating a culture of consent. Right. That it's not necessarily going to be like, oh, we did this program for a few years and now we have no more sexual assault. It's a longer process than that. For sure. And the other thing too I want to mention with that is this is again the Jason Laker and Erica Boas's, or based on their research that I shared that TED Talk with you guys on, and this whole research came out of the idea that college kids are engaging in hookup culture, right? We've heard that term a lot. And they kind of wanted to look into that a little more and end up debunking it, saying that no, hookup culture really doesn't exist. It's no different, really, than it has been, for their parents and parents before that. And then they kind of dove into it a little bit different and found that although, unfortunately, we've been doing, the Yes Means Yes consent campaigns and a lot of activity on college campuses to try and reduce those pretty startling rates of assault that happen, they haven't had any significant effect, right? Because they're kind of in isolation, right? Here's this big issue in this huge cultural netting that we all breathe and live in that is not sex positive, right? That is a rape culture that does not respect boundaries or each other, right? That's kind of what we live and breathe in. And then we have this one program saying, yes means yes, right? But that's not aligning with experiences, and often with the youth that I've worked with, they kind of just brush it to the side. It's like, well, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't really make sense to me. I've had sex before, and I think it was consensual, so whatever. What you're saying doesn't match my experiences, right? So that's kind of where the foundation of this came from is, well, clearly us telling people how to do consent isn't working, right? So how do we encourage folks to kind of make that for themselves? Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point.
Any other questions before I move on?
We have another comment about the Dr. Sen's program, that they've involved all genders in that program, and they call it Safety After High School. The Dr. Sen's program is 12 hours long. They take each aspect of it and touch on it with senior high school students. And they did also share that link, so I'll make sure that it's in the follow-up resources.
Great. Oh, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So hopping back in, so within the LGBTQ community and kink community, generally more of a foundation of affirmative consent. And it's more expected to talk about boundaries and preferences before doing anything with each other, sexual or otherwise. It's just the foundation is that we need to talk about this before we do anything, so we're on the same page about what we like, don't like, what's okay, what isn't okay, things like that, right? One of the biggest things to keep in mind with this stuff is we have a pretty strong heterosexual or heteronormative script, right? So man flirts with woman. If woman is into it, then, they might kiss, whatever. Somebody invites each other to go home, then they have sex. That's the end, right? Not necessarily a lot of talking or discussing what's going to happen. There's probably a presumption that penetrative sex is going to happen before anybody discusses anything, right? That's kind of the script that we get from the movies and from talking about each other's experiences, things like that. But LGBTQ plus folks can't rely on that, right? That does not fit their lived experiences. So they kind of have to forge their own rules and need to talk about it a little more, because who's going to initiate, who's going to kiss who isn't assumed, right? What kind of sex they're going to have isn't assumed. It can't be, because it just doesn't fit. So that's another one of those things to kind of keep in mind here at how impactful those scripts that we have and are supported in our culture, how strong they can be, right? And how we can work around them too, how everybody can work around them. Okay. So my last little nugget of an example of normalizing consent is actually based in Amy Hassenhoff's research, which I'm pretty sure she did a WCASA webinar at some point that I'm pretty sure I sat in. So I'm not sure if it was recorded, but anyway, look into her stuff. She's fantastic. Oh, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just saying she did do a webinar for us. Unfortunately, I think that was one that we did not record.
That's what I thought,
Amy
yeah.
did not want her research recorded.
Yeah, but she does have TED Talks and a pretty like up-to-date kind of blog with different tools and things like that that can be really positive. But anyway, this is kind of based in that. And what she did is she compared articles online, right? Because online, using the internet's a pretty big tool to answer sex questions, like we had kind of established earlier. So she compared advice about sex that was online, so like things like Cosmopolitan, right, where you'd find stuff like that. She compared those articles to articles that were about sexting, right, so sexting advice. And she found some pretty big differences there. With sexting advice, it was encouraged. Consent was more encouraged for reasons like having better sex, being safer, and having a greater foundation of comfort between the people who are participating. Where the sex advice, when consent was mentioned, which was not often, or at least not as often as in the sexting advice, the sex advice only really brought up consent as a way to spice things up, right? So her kind of finding from this was that sexting may encourage more explicit consent, right? Because we hear a lot about the like, don't send unsolicited pictures, right? You want to make sure that if you are sexting, that it is consensual, right? Which is already kind of a taboo thing to talk about, but that's kind of the foundation she's going in off of. It is a more sex positive approach, and that sexting may encourage more explicit consent because you can't assume consent through body language or think that consent is there, right, unless you talk about it, that more direct communication. So between the Netherlands as kind of an example in their Long Live Love program, LGBTQ and kink communities, and sexting, there are places, right, there are places where in sub-communities and communities, we're talking about consent is more normalized, right, and they don't all look the same at all, but they are kind of promising, right? So here's kind of the now what part. So I'm going to start with an example of what community-driven change is. So this is from the Define Your Line campaign. So it's a student-driven campaign. I cannot remember which campus it took place on, but it's in the research paper that I shared with everybody. But the campaign was designed by students, which is really, really important, right? Because that message is going to be way different than if that was designed by an administrator or designed only by a director, right? So having those student voices and those diverse student voices is really, really important. So what they decided would be a good approach for their campus to create more dialogue was to open an online forum and to post question and to post and answer questions, about relationships, consent, and experiences, right? And then people could put their opinion or their experience in there. Every once in a while, there would be something that was shared that was kind of perpetuating kind of toxic rape culture ideas, right? So at that time, either another student would say something, right? Hopefully in a respectful way, or there were some professors and volunteers who did interact on the forum, but they always disclosed that they were a professor, or they were, right? They did not like pretend to be another student. So anyway, that was one thing that they thought of. They also did like some tabling, and they did some focus groups and things like that. But they tried their best to make sure that diverse student populations were integrated. So for example, I know they had like a Greek life group, they had a sports group, right? They had a bunch of other different clubs on campus have their own groups. And then they did like a post and after survey and found that groups who supported rape myths the most, at least initially before this campaign, which I believe was like a 1 or 2 month campaign. So groups who supported those rape myths the most ended up seeing the biggest change, right? And why that happened is not necessarily clear because it was this huge campaign, right, with a lot of different moving pieces. But what they thought the biggest, most impactful piece was is that it was an interaction between peers, right? It wasn't coming top down. It wasn't a mandatory consent program that freshmen had to do when they first got into college. And then they just had to like click through this thing or talk and sit through this presentation, but it was interaction and conversation between peers, right? Which makes a really, really big difference in how these conversations happen. So this is just one example of community-driven change, but the biggest piece of this is that it's not an individual kind of going top down, right? It's made within and by individuals, so they can kind of define what it looks like for themselves. Another example of this from Lakers research that I talked about earlier is something called consent stories, where they interviewed a bunch of different couples of many different types and found that they were often not using very explicit consent, especially if they had a more long-term established relationship, right? They were not using that explicit verbal consent. One couple said that they're not really sure how it started, but when one person wanted to have sex, they would tug on the other person's pants a few times, like 3 times they would pull, like just tug on their pants. And if the other individual took off their pants, then that was their example of consent, and they would have sex, right? Whatever that looked like. So although it's not the can I do this yes model that we're often used to looking at, it is asked and answered, right? They established a ritual between each other where tugging on sweatpants a little bit is the question, right? And taking off the pants is the answer. So that again is just one example to kind of like reframe how we're looking at this stuff, right? Consent is all about permission, but the biggest piece is that there is asking and answering, and however that happens could be a little different. So what I want you to do, if you are willing, is what do you think community-driven change might look like in your community? So take a second to think about what communities you tend to work with, right? And a community can mean a lot of different things. That could mean a faith community, that could be like an age cohort, that could be racial, ethnic, I said religious already, that could be the community you work with, the community that you serve, a lot of different definitions, right? If you're on a campus, community within communities. So anyway, so take a second to think about what that might look like in your community, like what communities would that impact?
Okay. Someone said one resource for our sexual assault and domestic abuse survivors works with the local school districts, library, police force, and LGBTQ organizations to provide educational resources.
Okay, awesome.
Someone else said for me it would be the Hispanic community in rural towns.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a big thing to keep in mind too, is that kind of rural versus urban divide, right? That those communities are going to look a little bit different with access, right? How far apart they are from each other and things like that. So thank you for bringing that up. But the thing to keep in mind with this, those are all great examples. Thank you for sharing those. Is that the people that we work with have experiences that are different than us. They have different communities than we do, right? So how do we go about potentially framing something or offering opportunities for communities to frame what consent means to them, right? Kind of like what that couple did, but that's a more small example between the couple and tugging on the pants. So one example could be doing a full-blown like community-driven change kind of research model where you would do interviews with folks or have focus groups, right? Having opportunities for people to talk and share with each other within community groups to share their knowledge and share their experiences, right? Because that's going to look entirely different than me presenting to somebody or you presenting to a community. So any opportunity to kind of share those experiences and that knowledge can make a pretty profound impact in what the community-driven change looks like. The other thing I want to bring up that's really important, and not a concept I hear about a lot, and I think it's really, really interesting, is that there's a level of privilege to being sure, a level of privilege to giving consent, right? So we need to make sure that we're making enough space and time and respect for consent to happen. I wish I could have just put this video in this presentation, but I did share it with you. There's a TED Talk called The Privilege of Consent by Sherelle Hessel-Gordon. It's a little older, but it talks a lot about what this means and gives some examples, right? So one example that she mentions is that maybe for a person who is trying to figure out what their sexuality is, or has more fluid sexuality, but has not done anything other than maybe heterosexual sex or something prior to that, might be a little hesitant or unsure or resistant in giving that consent when maybe inside they're like, yes, I want to do this, but, you know, they're kind of wading through societal messages of homophobia or things that they've heard from their parents or friends about that are like homophobic comments, right? So even though they might, like, in their heart of hearts want to do something, they kind of got to wade through a lot of different stuff that's maybe pushing back against them in making that decision, right? So making room for that consent. Or for example, maybe someone who is really religious, right? Like someone who is under 18 or who is not married, who is religious and, you know, they're in a relationship and they want to have sex with somebody, they might not be as quick to give that yes, explicit consent, because even though, again, in their heart of hearts, they may want to do something with this person, do something sexual with this person, again, they're wading through all those messages of, you know, you can't have sex before marriage, or you shouldn't be doing this, that's sinful, right? So being mindful that everyone comes with different backgrounds, different messages that they've had to kind of sift through. So we want to make sure that we're giving enough space and time for people to make those decisions, to ask for consent and have that answered, right, and respected when it is answered. So this consent model is, again, made by and for a specific community, right? So it's not me telling all youth how to have consent and have sex in a respectful way, because, again, that's just not going to work. My lens is not going to fit their lens, right? It needs to be made within that community, just as one example. And again, this model kind of considers how consent operates in relationships that are diverse and does a better job anyway at respecting intersections, right? So the image to the left is just kind of showing, and I'm sure intersectionality is a concept that maybe some of you or a lot of you are familiar with, but it generally boils down to just understanding and respecting all different aspects of someone's identity, right? So education, sexuality, ability, ethnicity, culture, religion, things like that. Because that person's experiences are going to be different from your own or from mine. So we kind of went through a lot of stuff, a lot of different ways to maybe start challenging how we tend to talk about consent and think about consent and making it a more inclusive message, right? A more inclusive and community-driven message. But to start, a lot of this stuff requires a lot of organizing or talking to people, some things that take a lot of time, which is important. But maybe if you're feeling a little bit like rape culture is too much, too heavy, right? Like creating a culture of consent is going to take too long. One thing you can maybe do just starting now is just trying to absorb and use more consent and sex positive media, right? Whether that's, you know, whatever your Netflix binging shows are, right? Or if you are an educator and do prevention education, making sure that you're cycling and putting in more consent and sex positive messages, right? And again, if a huge like company or organization like Disney can start recognizing like, hey, people aren't really liking this whole Sleeping Beauty, someone is busting into their room and giving them a kiss as they're passed out kind of message, and then move to something closer to the Frozen example where there is explicit verbal consent, that's kind of promising, right? That's kind of promising that maybe we're on the right track. So just wanted to leave with a more uplifting uplifting thought before we finish today. So thank you all for your time. This is my contact info, email and phone, so feel free to connect with me about questions or comments or anything. I'd love to hear anything you have to share. All right, so do we have any other questions, thoughts, reactions? I'd love to hear any other thoughts that anybody has.
We did get some thank yous coming in for the information. I'm not seeing any questions for you right now, but we can pass any along if we get folks emailing them after. I'm sure it's okay. Is it okay with you if people reach out to you directly if they want to email you with questions?
Absolutely. I love hearing from everybody, so don't feel hesitant.
And maybe you might not be the right person to speak to this because I know you're relatively new at Wise Women, but someone is asking about the meaning behind your logo.
Oh, yeah. That is a good question that I do not know the answer for, but I will gladly look into that because I feel like I should know that. I will gladly look into that and I can let you know.
Awesome. All right. Well, if we get any questions after, I will definitely pass those along to you. Thank you so much for presenting. It was wonderful. I really loved hearing you speak about this topic. Jesse and I were discussing that while you were speaking, that we really like getting to see you present. And thank you to everyone for attending. And hope everyone has a happy SAAM.
Yeah, absolutely. Good luck with all of your events, and thanks again for tuning in.
Thank you.